you got this section in the book that talks about what you're talking about right now, the leadership factory, right? So here, I'm going to go to the book. All the academic classes in the world will never teach anyone to be a leader. The Academy recognized that long ago, and while we had to take courses on the subject, we learned by doing. The Academy is structured to provide leadership opportunities in a wide variety of places and levels from the very first day you start as plebes. And this is emphasizing what you just said, and discipline is something that I talk about all the time. And you know what's great is, as I was talking to you on the way over here, I do all these, I read these leadership, or not leadership books. They're not books about leadership. They're about combat, right? But combat is about leadership. So all these books, all of them, every single one of them, whether it's an ancient Roman military leader or a Marine in Vietnam or an army soldier in World War II, there's one common thing, and it's discipline, discipline, discipline. It's always there. Back to the book. Discipline forms the cornerstone of any military team. And of course, punishment serves as one of the means to maintain discipline. During my junior year, I learned not to be afraid to mete out punishment. At the same time, doing so requires a balance of appropriateness and understanding. So that's the why you just talked about right there. And this, again, goes to something that I talk about a lot, which is the dichotomy of leadership, which is, in leadership, there's opposing forces that are pulling you in two different directions, and both of them are right. They're both right. It's right to be hard on your guys and maintain strict discipline, and it's right to love your guys and take care of them. You have to balance those two. And that's what you're talking about right there. That's what you were talking about when you were talking about they need to understand why they're being punished. Back to the book. Bad officers try to be buddies with their Marines. There's a fine line between getting to know the men under your command and bonding with them as friends. It is all too easy to make that mistake. At the same time, here's the balance. At the same time, if a young second lieutenant doesn't make an effort to know his men, his aloofness becomes a drag and will hinder his ability to command in several ways. First, he won't understand the strengths and weaknesses of his squads. More important, he won't have the respect or the connection needed to motivate and lead in the worst of circumstances. Men will follow other men into the worst possible circumstances if they respect and believe in their leadership. Like all other aspects of command, it is a delicate balance. So you're just... everything you just said, you say it in the book. And that's why you're talking about the leadership factory. But it's interesting. This is stuff that I'm sure they touched on it in the classes, but that's the stuff that you learn. You learn it from senior enlisted people. You learn it from other officers. You learn it yourself. You work for people and you go, man, this guy's aloof. This guy's not talking to us. So it's stuff that we learn ourselves too. I'm going to finish this section up. I concluded the proper balance here depended on the officer's ability to listen and accept input while still making it clear that he was the ultimate decision maker. That was the key. A second lieutenant couldn't be afraid to engage in frank and productive dialogue with his key leaders. A platoon becomes the reflection of its commander. He sets the example. And this is from what you just said. If his uniform is jacked up, his men won't care about their own. This leads to disciplinary issues and becomes a very slippery slope. The only way a second lieutenant can have the moral authority to set a high standard for conditioning and appearance is to be the example himself. Without conditioning, a platoon cannot achieve its potential in the field. Aggressiveness suffers. Appearance breeds pride and reinforces discipline and esprit de corps. So that's the leadership factory that you're talking about. And clearly, those things that you brought from the football field and from the academy, you applied them right directly into your folks in combat.
They helped, and the Marine Corps has a really unique circumstance where they have the basic school where every single officer goes there. And that's huge to set this huge standard. Then we go a step further where when we go to infantry officer course, that course was 13 weeks long, one of the very hardest, if not the hardest in the Marine Corps. Mentally, physically, everything. You don't know anything that's coming. Everything's a surprise. But I felt that my instructors during our course were phenomenal. and they were getting all the real-time intelligence from the battlefield. All the training was realistic. But in terms of how you relate to your Marines, from your junior enlisted to your middle rank to your senior enlisted, how you relate to the senior enlisted from the battalion who work directly for the battalion staff, how you manage those relationships to maximize the effectiveness of your platoon to make sure that you can get exactly what they need. They did such a good job of that. Then you take it one step further. When I reported to 3rd Battalion, 2nd Marines, I'd be remiss if I didn't give credit to a guy by the name of Gabe Diana, who is a lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps now, I believe. But he taught me, he was a true student of leadership and military history. He would tell me all the time, his craft is his hobby. There's nothing else he cared about. It's what he was. He loved being a Marine, loved being an officer, and he taught me a lot about decentralized leadership, how to not micromanage, how to empower your junior leaders so that they start to think like you and you could achieve tempo on the battlefield. And you could immediately see examples of Marines. I call it, and I see it all the time in the business world, I call it JV leadership, where I'm a great leader if my people love me. And they're the same leaders that will tell their people, all right, guys, today we've got to stay 30 minutes longer because headquarters said so. Look, I disagree with it. I think it's ridiculous, but we have to do it, so let's just sit here together. Now, none of their people are actually going to work motivated. There's going to be no discipline. There's going to be no standard that they're trying to achieve because of that horrible leadership.
Yeah, in fact, they're angry at headquarters.
Absolutely.
They're mad at the chain of command.
Exactly. It's JV leadership, and I'm constantly trying to talk to people about that. Look, JV leadership, the first thing of it is you think you have to be loved to be an effective leader. If you are an effective leader, over the long term, you will be loved, but there's going to be intermittent parts where they can't stand you. They don't understand things all the time, or they're going to be mad at you and because they're emotional. But over long term, they're going to understand that what you did was best. The second major part to JV leadership is thinking, hey, I'm in charge, therefore I come up with all the great ideas. And I'm going to make every single decision without your input, and I'm going to really try hard to make sure everybody knows I am in charge. That's ridiculous. It is not your job to come up with all the great ideas. Some of the best ideas I received were from 19-year-olds. 21-year-olds who had already been to Iraq once hey, sir, I got a great idea. Well, I want to hear all about it. It's our job as leaders to decide which are the best ideas to invest energy, time, and resources in. And that's not just, I get all this stuff all the time when I talk to different groups and companies. Well, military leadership is different than corporate leadership. Why? What am I saying here that doesn't apply? Well, it's too extreme. It is not. You're taking us too literal with our warrior mentalities here. You do not need to be an insecure. The best leaders are not insecure. They're secure. They know that they're there and ultimately going to make the final decision. But it empowers your people, and you could achieve tempo when you're decentralized enough that they feel good about coming up with ideas, sending them up to you to get backup for it and get resources behind it. But also knowing that they can make the appropriate decisions at their level because they know what your final intent is. Here's the outcome I want achieved. You get us there. You're the expert at it. That's why I hired you. I didn't tell my machine gunners how to work their T&E system and how to sight in their machine guns, right? I just told them what I wanted them to hit. They're better than that at me. Taking the time to spend it with my Marines in their different functions and aspects and talk to them about how they're the expert and compliment them like that, it made them feel great. It does wonders for a leader to go to their level, see what they do every day, and see that expert work. Because they don't expect you to be an expert in all of that. They know that, right? Your job is different. Your responsibilities are different. You need to have greater perspective. But when you go to their level and respect what they do and show them respect for what they do and how they do it, man, it's a powerful thing. That could make a group of people so much better collectively than they ever would have been individually. And when it happens, right, when you finally get there and can achieve that, it is awesome. It's the most rewarding experience you could ever have. And it's hard for people to understand because most people think, well, the most rewarding experience you guys probably have is killing people. No, it's so much different than that. So much different. There's so much more to it than that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting too that, by the way, what you're saying right now is basically the entire book that my buddy Leif Babbitt wrote. There's a chapter in there called Decentralized Command. I mean, everything you're saying. So, and that's why, you've come up in a completely different, in the Marine Corps, I was in the Navy, and yet, you and I have both, I can tell right now, basically completely aligned leadership principles. Isn't it interesting though that some guys don't get it? They don't get it, and you could explain it to them, and you'd say, listen, man, hey, you don't need to make every decision. And in fact, when you get out in a firefight, you won't be able to make every decision. You're going to have to let your leaders lead, and you're going to and they would listen to you, and you could see it going right through their head.
It's wild. You wonder what psychologically is going on in there that makes you want to rebel. And a lot of times it's, hey, they got a bad review from this officer. So this is their way of saying, hey, go fly a kite. This is their way of rebelling. I noticed that with some officers. And some of the, I had a fire lieutenant during my second deployment, and he had this problem. He kept feeling he had to be best friends with his Marines. He spent way too much time with them, talking about a lot of personal stuff. They'd be out on patrol and nobody would listen to him. I mean, it was almost straight mutiny. And then when I had to fire him, and here was the thing is, I had to tell him, look, you're a really good person. And you are most likely going to be very successful in whatever you choose to do. So please remember that. It's hard to hear that now. This is a very unique job. And we are in a very dangerous scenario. We were already in Iraq, and we were in a dangerous area at the time. And things were about to go south. And I had to remove this kid now before things got worse. And it was hard for him to understand that. But you can be a phenomenal human being, a great person, but just not meant to lead, especially in those circumstances. But it's some people, and I think obviously if they have so many years growing up in a household where it was so different from what they're being taught, that I think sometimes is the root for them to push back against this type of leadership. No, I've been taught differently for years and years. It's kind of like, wow, did you just block it all out for the, year and a half you've been in school before you got here?
With guys with all this combat experience, and not to mention hundreds of years of history of combat experience, saying, look, this is the best way to do it.
Yes.
And saying, no, I'm going to do it differently.
The military is a business. It is a business. It's run like a business. And the leadership there, it's about maximizing the potential of all the human beings that you have on your team. And how do you do that? Yes, it involves tactics, and what we do is different. But the personal, the small unit down to the large unit leadership is all the same. It's all the same. And you go around and you talk to different executives who are having trouble. Well, it's the millennials and what they do and this do. And we were talking about it in the ride here. People, the experts, always want to blame some kind of process. I think your process and your information flow is wrong, and the way that you have your workflow set up in the office space, that's causing this issue in communication. No, it's not. You're saying that because you are afraid to have the hard conversations with the leaders who are failing.
Right. Of which, by the way, you're one of the leaders.
Yes.
Yes. So when you're failing as a business and you got these issues, you're going to be one of the problems. And you might need help squaring that away. And that's okay. That's okay. You know what? Another thing I notice in business world is a lot of people in the business world, they have no leadership training. So they've figured it out. They've been lucky and successful, and they've gotten by with good people. And then they get to a certain point where all of a sudden they're going, wait a second, I can't handle this anymore. If you grow from 6 people that you know pretty well, that you trust, and all of a sudden you got a staff of 100 people, if you don't start learning how to lead, you're going to have significant problems, and it's going to blow up. And that happens from 100 people to 300 people, and then from 300 people to 1,000 people. It'll happen every time. And you got to train those leaders throughout the chain of command that all have the same understanding of the fundamental principles of combat leadership, which is leadership. Yes. I have to throw combat in there because that was my old job.
It's funny you bring that up. There's a great example. Dan Quinn is the current head coach of the Atlanta Falcons. He was a defensive coordinator at Seattle, hired as a head coach in Atlanta, and he's a very good friend of Jay Glazer, who's obviously very involved in mixed martial arts and does a lot of the Fox broadcasts, and I've worked with him and gotten close with him. And so Jay introduced me to Dan. Dan was looking to make the team tougher. And here's a guy who has achieved the highest level of leadership and coaching, just like you talked about. He was a great coordinator. Now he's a head coach. And he had the humility to seek out experts from he went to different sports, talked to their head coaches. He went to the military. He went all over with humility to ask and get advice and glean experience from other people's time and leadership, to include, I couldn't believe it, but here I am having breakfast with the man. Here I'm in his office, or I'm in there in their little cafeteria there, and we're just talking leadership. And he's talking about some of his individual guys, and he's actually listening to my opinion, wanted to hear what I went through, my opinion on this guy or that guy, as he brought me in to do some martial arts drills to make the team tougher. But I gained so much respect for that. Here's a man who's achieved the highest level. He knows he's in charge. He's not out to prove anything. His guys know he's in charge. And when they don't meet the standard, there's a consequence. But at the same time, he shows them the same kind of humility as he seeks out advice to get better every day, because he wants them. Hey, Julio Jones, I know you think you're the best wide receiver in football, but there's ways you can get better, and you need to be humble enough to find them. And guess what? Julio goes first in every drill. The dude's, I've watched him, works as hard as any human being I've seen in the football field. Always looking to get better. Matt Ryan, the same. And look at the position the team's in now. But he has continually done that. He turned to Navy SEALs last summer, brought SEALs in to work with his team, to work with him on leadership, on accountability, and all this combat, but leadership.
That's leadership.
And bring it into that locker room and create this cohesive unit that has had a tremendous turnaround from the 2015 season to now 2016.
Yeah.
Now in the NFC Championship.
Again, for you reciting my book, which is what you do, because we got a chapter there. It's called Check Your Ego. And, my point is the number one characteristic that a leader has to have is humility. And if you don't have that, all those things that you just talked about, you won't do any of them. You won't ever get better. You won't listen to anybody else. You won't take any advice. You can't. It's a horrible thing.